in Austin, Texas. And he lives in South Austin, all right? And he begins to notice that South Austin politics are very different than North Austin politics, right? And you think, I wonder why, okay? So he looks around him and he notices things are different in South Austin than North Austin. What are some? Who's putting kind of on? Okay, so in Austin, how is South Austin different than North Austin? Suburban, right? And so you have downtown Austin, it's more walkable, there's also Zilker Park, right? You know, I've got the South by Southwest there many years ago. Now I am older and tired, and it's getting too hot in September to spend 3 days outside. But, you know, I used to go there pretty often. It's walkable. I used to go to, South by Southwest. I would go downtown Tulsa, and then downtown Austin, and then, you know, Austin City Limits Fest, ACL, in the fall, you know, and so those are all held at that place, right? Things are walkable, there are clubs, there's bookstores, it's bikeable, things like that. Whereas in North Austin, how do you feel about getting around on a bike? Yeah, not really. What are you going to do instead? You're going to drive, right? Okay? So you're going to drive, you're not going to be able to walk as much, and there's also just a different vibe, right? More big box stores, fewer small places, fewer independent bookstores and music and things like that. Less live music, certainly, right? And so he says, I wonder if this is connected to politics, right? I wonder if this is connected to politics. And so he starts looking at some things. Now, first of all, in political science, we have a pretty strong set of research that indicates that polarization is elite-driven, okay? And what that means is those people who are in power in media organizations or who are elected to public office are the ones that are most likely to drive polarization. In other words, to drive the parties apart, to the far left or to the far right, okay? And so, there's some pretty strong evidence for it. Morris Fiorina's book, Disconnect in particular, shows that. Culture War indicates that. And then Hill and Tassanovich, their statistical work really shows how it's elites that seem to be the ones driving this polarization. They're going to say, you know, basically polarization does not reflect the beliefs of real people, right? We're more kind of in the middle. And not only that, but a significant number of people always stay in the same place. We don't move around. Because the big store kind of depends on us doing that. And so Bill Bishop's going to say, you know what? I think you're partially wrong. And so part of that is that it is citizen-driven. This is his belief. It's citizen-driven. And it comes from the fact that in the 1960s, people began moving more and more, all right? And so not only did they move more, they didn't just move from their small town to another small town or to a big town, but they began moving to find places that really fit with who they were. And he says, and you know, it's culturally driven. It's not politically driven. It's not based upon my political affiliation or my political beliefs. It's based upon things that I like. And he says political polarization is a byproduct of that. And so let's talk about what some of that means. So when we talk about this, what are places of cultural comfort, right? I will tell you what I like. All right, in terms of cultural comfort. There are some things that I can refer to. I grew up in a small town, Pryor, Oklahoma, the cultural center of the universe, where you can literally drive to anything in Pryor in 5 minutes. That's the maximum time. How many of you grew up in a town like that? A few, okay? So that's part of my cultural comfort. But you know, I also spent 18 years in college, and so I like a college town too, right? In particular, when we talk about good drinks, good music, good food, good atmosphere, good architecture, I really like a college town. I do. You know, I like live music. I like to go watch people performing, right? These are things that I like. I like music festivals. I like all this sort of stuff. And not only that, but I like to walk places, right? I actually hate driving. The whole reason I have a car is to get me to a place. How many of you really enjoy your car and you like your car, right? It's a car for you. You like being in it. Right. My husband is right there with me, right? He chooses cars based upon the fact that he's going to enjoy driving it. He likes going for drives and stress. I'm not interested in that. That does not work, right? But many of you would agree with him, right? Okay. So whenever we're talking about this downtown Austin area, where people are walking and biking and things like that, they're like, I like driving my car. I don't mind living in a place like that, right? That works better for me. You move to places of cultural comfort, and it even gets bigger than that. You know, things like good temperature. Okay, I'm going to give you guys three choices. I'm going to give you a choice between, I'll give you four. I'll give you a choice between beaches, mountains, plains, and deserts, all right? So tell me which of these you would most like to live in. Raise your hand if you'd rather live in a beach. All right. How many of you would rather live in the mountains? Okay. What about the plains?
2.
3 people, all right? Okay, what about the desert? Nobody. The desert is very unpopular today. All right, so, but you're going to move to a place of cultural comfort, right? I'm with you beach people. I prefer a beach. I like the smell of, you know, salt and stuff like that. These are things I like. My husband, unfortunately, really likes the snow. We really have compromised a lot down here, right? So we move to places of cultural comfort, okay? And so that's the first part of that. In 2014, if you look, we have these really polarized wings, sorry. What I get for not having pockets today. So we have these really polarized wings. And if you look at this and you say, hey, among the general public, right, who are the partisan makers, the steadfast conservatives, the business conservatives, the solid liberals? Well, this year makes up about 36% of the general public. You guys did ideology quizzes on Friday in your labs. And so you may say, oh, you know, I fit into that or I didn't really fit into that. Okay? 36% of the population is going to fit there. But if you look at the percentage that they make up of the politically engaged, right, it's much higher, right? Greater percentages of the partisan makers are in the politically engaged wing, right? And so that tells us a couple of things. That kind of indicates that maybe we're talking about more elite-driven or more people who are ideologically centered, who are driving the politics. And so it's kind of a different way to look at it too. But we can also look at things that divide us in terms of our education. How many of you plan to get a college degree? All of you raise your hands now. Being positive thoughts, all right? Okay. So you all plan to get a college degree, all right? And that is going to set you apart from people who only have a high school degree in a couple of ways. Number one, 3/4 of people who get a college degree move at least once, versus half of people who have a high school degree. That's a pretty significant difference. Add into that, that people with a college degree tend to move longer distances. They don't just move to the town next door or to a bigger city, okay? Instead, They're more likely to move to the beach or the mountains or the one person who didn't raise a hand but really loved the desert, right? They're more likely to move further away. Whereas, if you have a high school education, you're much more likely to move within the same state. And you're more likely to move only once. Whereas people with a college degree are more likely to move multiple times. And their employment matters more. So they're going to choose jobs. I have students come to me all the time, especially I help some students work on their LSATs. They're going to law school, and they're thinking about where they want to go to law school. And I talk to them about that really important question. Well, where do you want to live? Where do you want to live? And so let's look at places that work well for where you want to live, because it matters, right? The most affluent are the most likely to move. They're much more mobile. They're going to move even further. So these things are going to connect. It means that politically active wing, the people who are more likely to be ideological, the people who are more likely to know where they stand on politics, are also the ones most likely to move in this big sword, cultural comfort. We have some culturally based cleavages. One is religion and church. How many of you are Catholic in here? Anyone? Okay, so about 7 or 8 of you are Catholic. There are 2 Catholic churches in Norman, right? One of them is more traditional, and one of them is more progressive. People tend to choose the church that fits them better. So we're talking about not even, and that's just within the Catholic denomination of Christianity. We find ourselves splitting more and more, and this is very different. My parents grew up in a very small area. Pleasant View Baptist Church was their church, okay? They lived in a little community called Pleasant View, where the people who lived in the community built a 2-room schoolhouse, and they built a church, okay? And so the 2-room schoolhouse that they went to, Pleasant View School, was just over the gully, or the bluff, or something, from Pleasant View Baptist Church. And the people who went to Pleasant View Baptist Church were there because of ideology, because of their religious beliefs. Why'd they go to that church? It was the one there. It was the closest one. Right? And so that meant that there was a lot of diversity there in terms of who they talked to. Right? These are people who go to this church because it's the church that's closest to them. My mother's church, after many years, had a big split. This is not unusual. But the First Baptist Church of Pryor, Oklahoma, had a big split about 10 years ago. Essentially, it happened like this. The deacons went to the new pastor, who was new there, and said, hey, so you can't just do these things without coming to the deacon. This needs to be a vote of the church. And he said, well, if I need a light bulb change, I'll call the deacons together, but this is my church. That caused a split of the church? The big difference was that they had been giving free lunches and also backpacks to some of the kids or to particular schools in the area, and he wanted to discontinue that. So he discontinued it. And so they created a church where they said, no, what we want is community focus. Right? It became a different kind of church. Right? So that means that they weren't talking to people who wanted that, and the people who stayed weren't talking to people who wanted a community focus. We divide ourselves. We also have lifestyle, talk about that walking, the proximity to restaurants and shops, healthy pursuits, closeness to the sporting events. How many of you want to live in a city that has a pro-team in it? A few, right? That's a consideration for some of you. You want to go watch elite level sports, okay? How many of you want to live somewhere where there's access to the great outdoors? A few. How many of you want to live in the middle of the city? More? Okay? And so when we talk about what it is that you want, we're finding that we also divide this way in terms of lifestyle. What it is that we want. Right? We've already talked about using our cars, right? I would prefer to walk everywhere, just because I don't like getting in the car. But we also separate ourselves based on things like tribes. This is where it starts to get a little bit more political, but not necessarily. FarmersOnly.com, right? Woo! Eric will only date a farm girl, and so he will only go to FarmersOnly.com to find his prospective paramours, right? ChristianMingle.com. I will only talk to people who are of my religion. And then we see others flaring, and these become more political. All right, white nationalism, Bernie Bros. Where people are not hearing anything outside of the group of people that they talk to. There's some big consequences of cultural cleavages becoming a part of our partisan idea of ourselves, becoming a part of what a party is. It becomes high stakes, right? My friend Jill and I often lament the fact that nobody really talks about the impact of the capital gains tax. Okay? You guys know what I'm talking about? Right? We don't talk about that in terms of politics, right? That's not where our debate is. Instead, we're talking about things that are personal, that are cultural, and it becomes high stakes because we find ourselves defending our way of life. If this is not your religion, if this is not your party, then I have nothing to say to you. Right? It's much easier for a demagogue to come to power, as President Harris pointed out, and it's much easier for an autocrat to come to power. I don't know why I don't have a last little bit there. If we are concentrating on cultural cleavages rather than policy debates about things like, the size of government, right? Or what government should do. Instead, we're saying, this is who I am as a person, and therefore you're attacking me. And so anybody who supports that, we are going to side with. Because it's not a question of logic, it's a question of emotion. And that's where demagogues and autocrats gain power. It gets really personal. In 1960, 5% of Republicans and 4% of Democrats said that they would be upset if their child married someone from the opposite party. In 2010, 49% of Republicans and 33% of Democrats would be upset. That's 2010. What do you think it's like in 2023? Higher? I think so too. We are dividing ourselves based upon this idea that we are not culturally similar, and our culture and who we are, the team that we play for, is tied to a particular political party. So, what reinforces it? Part of it is media transformation. I think this is a little hard to read. Part of it is media transformation. And we're going to talk about a lot of that on Wednesday. But understand, for example, in the 1970s, whenever I was a kid, there were 4 television stations. There's ABC, there's CBS, there's NBC, there's PBS, the only channel I was ever allowed to watch. But when we talked about news, people watch the same news. It was the same information. And so President Nixon is watching Walter Cronkite. And when Walter Cronkite says, it appears the president has covered up and is complicit in the Watergate break-in. And he says, if I've lost Cronkite, I've lost the nation. Can you imagine any news outlet producing information and saying, here, this is the fact, and the entire nation going, them's the facts? Can you think of anyone? The entire nation agreeing? We're way too splintered, right? We're way too splintered for that to happen. You know, I stay in my lane and I watch my news that comes at me from my bias, right? I hear the things I want to hear. You hear the things you want to hear. And so it's difficulty even being able to have consensus about what reality is. So when we talk about confirmation bias, there's this neat experiment that they do, right? And they put people into an MRI machine, right? And these people have said, you know, I'm liberal or I'm conservative. And there's a sample of both, right? And they go into the MRI machine, and while they're in the MRI machine, they are running images of their brain. And when they play the beginning of Fox News, and they say, Fox News reports today, and they give a news story, then those people who have conservative brains, their entire brain lights up, and they take in the information, and that's it. If they play Fox News, and they give the story, those people who are liberals, their brain shuts down. And they only hear this part. They ignore it. And the opposite is true as well. With the same exact news story that they say, today on MSNBC, and conservative brains shut down, and liberal brains light up. We hear what we want to hear. And so this splintering of the news media along ideological spectrum makes it difficult for us to reach consensus because we're even further, we're not even, first of all, we're saying, hey, we're not on the same team, all right, fair enough, but at least we're agreeing on the rules generally. But now, there's no reality, there's no rules. Because we're hearing two different sets of rules. Another impact of this is that one of the things that Bill Bishop witnessed in South Austin. It's kind of like this. If you talk to the same people who have the same culture and beliefs that you do, over and over again, it becomes an echo chamber. And your ideology gets more and more extreme. Because you don't have anybody say, hey, wait a second. Or actually, my experience is a little bit different. You don't have anybody questioning that. Then your ideology just gets more extreme in this echo chamber. And so polarization becomes greater. We also have the impact, of course, of money. We're going to talk a lot about money over the next few weeks. Advocacy organizations are able to pinpoint specific issues and pinpoint particular levels of government in which to advocate for their positions. ALEC, which is a conservative organization, has been writing legislation for the last 20 years and taking it directly to state legislators. They're most effective, incidentally, when state legislators are term limited, because the state legislators don't have any personal expertise. So they say, oh yeah, this seems good. I will submit this. I'll put my name on it. And they do. They you look at the news, you can see it. Hey, in this legislature, they're passing this, and in this legislature, they're passing the same thing, and in this legislature, they're passing something very similar. It's because it's all the same legislation. It's all created by the same group. Advocacy organizations use pinpointed lobbying efforts, campaign efforts, in order to further polarize. The final bit is kind of brain development, which is, it could be nurture, it could be nature, it could be the way you're born, it could be the way you're raised, right? But there's some weird things that happen in that MRI too. They also showed pictures of disgusting things, right? And as they showed pictures of disgusting things, they found that conservative brains, their amygdala, their fear center, was much more activated, right? Their revulsion and fear. Whereas liberal brains, less so. Okay? And this is a tendency, okay? And at the same time, they also found that liberal brains tended to have a bigger anterior cingulate cortex. And what that means is that they're more likely to do what? You might have a biology major student, right? What? Anterior cingulate cortex? Any thoughts? The logic center, right? But it's also an executive function center. So, therefore, able to categorize and put things into different categories more easily. It's not all the same. Okay? Bill Bishop uses this as some proof. He says in 1976, these were the landslide counties. And landslide means you win by 60-40, 20 points or more. Okay, that's what a landslide is defined as. And the dark black counties are Democrat landslide counties in 1976. And I know you're like, wait a second. Well, things change. We'll talk about that later. And then the Republican landslide counties are the gray counties. Okay? And then all the white counties were not landslides. Okay? This is 1976. Here's 2000. Okay? Think about what that means in terms of, I'll go back for a second, I think. 76, 2000. That means more and more that we are in places where there is only a single dominant party. And so, that's important because homogeneous groups grow more extreme. Whether it's liberal or conservative, they grow more extreme. Create these echo chambers where our views are reinforced rather than challenged. Nobody says no to us. People say, yeah, and. Right? Yes, and. Not, maybe, but. Right? We don't have that challenge. If majorities grow, minorities retreat, which is another thing that Bill Bishop is going to witness in that South Austin area. He said among their neighbors, they were generally pretty liberal, and so they would get together for neighborhood meetings, and they would propose things, and when you would see this echo chamber growing, but there was one guy. And this one guy was like, hey, I don't want that. I want this. I think this is what government ought to do. I think this is the policy we ought to have. Until they just stop showing up. Because what? Why do you stop showing up? Their neighborhood meeting. Yeah. You didn't identify with everybody else in? Okay, if you were elected, so cover yourself, but also when you weren't represented at all, right? because he was a small minority, people weren't even considering what he was saying. So what's the point?
There's an election tomorrow, don't forget.
What?
There's an election tomorrow.
Oh yeah, just a reminder, there is an election tomorrow. How many of you are registered to vote? Okay, there's an election tomorrow. Do you guys know what it's about? Legalization of marijuana. Right? However you feel on it, yes or no. It's the second election of the year so far. There will be another in April. Right? But the way you vote matters. If you don't vote, then you're also retreating. It reduces participation. In Oklahoma, as I told you guys at least 3 times this semester, we have the lowest voting rate in the nation. Why? Why? Well,
Right here.
Right? One,
Wait.
minorities retreat. So in this case, oh yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I'm not from Oklahoma, and what I noticed when I came here is that at least like most people seem to be Republicans, and so if you're not a Republican, it's kind of discouraging to vote because why you vote.
Okay, most people are Republicans. If you're not a Republican, why vote? Because it doesn't matter, right?
Even if you are a Republican, there's so many Republicans that losing one doesn't really matter.
And even if you're a Republican, why vote? Because it doesn't matter. Right? And so you have low voting on both sides. People who maybe side more with the Democrats say, what's the point of going here to go red anyway? Republicans say, what's the point? We're going to win anyway. And people don't vote. So you get major levels of apathy. That means that the majority doesn't have to do the work if the minority doesn't show up. Right? By not voting, you're just saying, hey, get more screen, I'm cool with it. The political consequences are pretty serious. Opinion is obviously more complex than what we are presented with by candidates for an office, right? And not only that, it's more complex than what the parties are presenting as our options. You guys did the I-Side group quiz. How many of you ended up as either a Democrat or a Republican? Raise your hand. That is not very many. How many of you ended up as something that was not a Democrat or a Republican? Raise your hand. That's most of you. Opinion is complex. And so when we boil it down to these very sort of culture issue type things, it's us against them. So we're not taking into consideration the fact that we have complex feelings about different policy issues, and maybe we should have discussions about the multiple ways to solve problems, right? One of the concerns is this. What you see whenever parties get more polarized is that people change their opinion to fit with their political party. And I think a really good example of this is Russia. In 2012, if you ask Republicans, is Russia a major threat to the United States? 90% of Republicans said, yes, it is. 2022, it's down to 37%. Because the leadership of the Republican Party is saying something different. And so people are changing their opinion on something they had an opinion about to align with their political party. You see this happening, and we'll talk about this when we talk about the secular realignment that happens in the South following the Civil Rights Act, where you see people who are very much in favor of big government saying, no, I don't want big government because I'm aligning myself over here. Okay? So they're changing on what their idea of government should be. Again, Robert Dahl's gonna say, if public opinion aligns on all dimensions, anything other becomes enemy. Think about what that means for politics. How can we have a conversation with our enemy? By raising the stake of politics and making it so deeply personal, we are unable to solve a lot of the problems that we need to solve. People moving to places, districts becoming more extreme, that's part of it. The other part of it is, we also have elites who are drawing lines to make sure that this district becomes overwhelmingly Republican, or this district becomes overwhelmingly Democrat. Okay? The 5th district in Oklahoma, what do you guys know about the 5th district in Oklahoma? You guys know where it is? Other than there?
I live in
You guys
it.
know where the 5th congressional district is?
I
All
live
right,
in
Eric, you can answer.
Like, where is it?
Yeah, where is it?
So it's North Oklahoma City, all the way out to Potawatomi Nation. It kind of, I hate to use the G word, but kind of zigzags around certain neighborhoods
Eric is
to,
afraid to say that it's a gerrymandered district. It is in fact a gerrymandered district, because it was a little bit different, right? And it included all of Oklahoma City. And then it went out to Potawatomi County as well, still at that time. But by including all of Oklahoma City, it included South Oklahoma City, which now is 3 different congressional districts. Why?
you want their reasoning or?
What's the real reason? Why did the legislature draw the district that way?
Because we had a Democrat win it last time and they didn't want that again.
So the district becomes a state, right? Extreme districts mean that we have extreme representatives, and so they won't even talk to each other. You guys watch any C-SPAN? Fascinating, but you totally watch it, all right? The decline in moderates in Congress, 40% in 1977, 10% in 2005 of this party. Moderates today, moderates who are not voting party line, handful. 6, 7, that's total. In the Senate, I can count 4. 4 moderates in the Senate, so 4%. Okay? It says all but 1 moderate then. That's actually true, because everybody else is in it. But this predicts government gridlock. This predicts government gridlock, which means that government is not particularly effective, which means that government comes off as not being what you want it to be, or not doing what you need it to do. And if that's the case, then do we trust government very much? No. Right? What does it do anyway? Local opinion becomes more and more important. National opinion is not heeded. We're going to talk about that when we get to public opinion. And it makes compromising really, really difficult. So, let's do a quick experiment. Think of your home community. Is it like one of these things? Is there high church membership, Baptist, evangelical, mega churches? Is it a rural community with a declining population? Is there a lot of gun ownership? Hunters, 4-H, rodeos? Is it an ethnically homogeneous suburb? Okay, is it one of those things, or is it more like urban density, high-tech businesses, research parks, college and college towns, alternative bookstores, bike paths, arts districts, young single professionals, so population is not declining but growing, ethnic and racial diversity, and new immigrants. So I'm going to go back. How many of you would say some community is more like one of these? Okay, what about this? Let's look closer at this. Right? These different communities, Bill Bishop is going to say, hey, look, People are flocking to places where they feel more comfortable. So this is going to be more conservative, and this is going to be more liberal. How many of you would like to have some land, live in a small town, whatever you leave public? How many of you, that's kind of ideal for you? Raise your hand. Maybe 10. How many of you want to live in a suburban area close to a bigger downtown? Raise your hand. Okay. How many of you want to live in a city? Small city, big city, you know, raise your hand. Okay. So city and suburbs are winning on that, right? And the rural small town is losing people. When we talk about this, just because you want to live in a rural or small town community does not necessarily mean you have a particular political predilection. But you're going to hear more and more from that side than from any other side. Just like if you want to live in a city and downtown, the same things are true. Your opinion may not be particularly liberal.
Question.
Yes.
What if you just want to live probably in the house?
That's a rural area. Buffalo land, living in a rural area, right?
But you don't want to drive to the house, or you want to go to the
That's rural. That's what rural is. That's the definition, right? But the point is you're going to hear from people that are much more like conservative or liberal. That's not necessarily your position. And you may not have one, but you're going to be swayed in that way. It's going to be connected. So how do we bridge the divide? I don't think I asked this question. I asked a different question, and your code for today is what is it?
I'll look it up. Has to do about Ukraine, doesn't it?
The big sword, the efficient? I don't know what it is. It's all caps. It's on your cap block.
1 second. Polar.
Oh, it's a polar, so polarization. So it's P-O-L-A-R, okay? And so I'm asking a question about polarization there, but I want you guys to think about this question. How do we, in fact, bridge the divide? Do we do it with education? And by education, I am talking about not just this class, though this is part of it, right? But elementary school, I asked in my earlier class, they're a little bit ahead of you because the president didn't come to their class. I asked them what their first local memories were, and many of them said, in elementary school, we had an election for president. How many of you had that? Okay? How many of you participated in student government? How many of you had a civics class where we talked about the politics of the day? Right? When we talk about what it is that might make a difference, that might make a difference. Engagement in community, open conversations, or labs on Friday could absolutely be other possibilities.